this, I think, is going to emphasize to you how mindsets are pretty fixed on issues. I've been struck by the need for a radical reassessment. And what we're going to hear in the next 25 minutes, I think, is a way of understanding that mobility is being looked at in different ways by different people in different sectors. The potential to deliver climate neutral mobility. A decarbonized mobility sector requires working with stakeholders. Now, Christina, what I want to do is come to you because, first of all, is that from our briefing call before, you said very clearly that really the way in which we've got to approach mobility has got to change dramatically.
Yep.
In other words, the fixing of we've got to have cars, we've got to have machines, maybe that is the wrong way of approaching it, and that's clear from the kind of work that you're doing. Help us underscore what you're thinking.
Yeah, I mean, representing Voi, we're kind of the rebel and the newcomer up here on the panel. And our approach has been to approach it from a city and a citizen point of view from the get-go. We see that we have a clear issue when it comes to transportation in cities today. Take my ride to get here this morning. I was stuck in traffic for 29 minutes in a taxi, which could have taken me 6 minutes on a bike. There's congestion, there's pollution, there's stress. That clearly is an issue today. We also see a clear megatrend when it comes to city life, right? We have 55% of urban population today living in cities. We have approximately 68% that are gonna be anticipated 2050, taking up 3% of the space. We have a space issue, we have a transportation issue. There were mentioned today as well that 30% of all emissions in Sweden coming from transportation. Our point of view and where we stand on it is that we know that 60% of all the trips in cities are below 10 kilometers. They're mainly taken by cars, taxis, and that's the trips we want to do something about by offering what has been a kind of buzzword coming up now the last 4 years, which is the word micromobility. So we're offering this first last mile service with e-bikes, e-scooters, and more modes to come in the future.
But there's a basic principle here you talked about before we came on the platform. You can't swap out all the internal combustion engine cars with battery electric or hydrogen. In other words, you've got to think differently about mobility.
You need to rethink it all. You need to rethink cities. And what we want to do is that we want to reclaim this space for its citizens and its people. I mean, trading off gas and diesel cars is great, and we've seen great progress on that, and it's clearly making its impact on emission, but we still have the space issue. So there's clearly a lot to do that we need to rethink and not thinking that electric vehicles is the way forward.
Now, we're not going to resolve any of this. We want to hear just your points of view and the positions you're taking. Nils, let me come to you from Polestar, because you said there's a significant issue here about a lot of people being tone deaf to the issues that we're raising here this afternoon.
So let's start with the transport sector. The transport sector is part of the problem, and the auto industry as well. And we said, yeah, let's be part of the solution instead. And we started with transparency. So transparency around what is actually the impact of our cars from a CO2 equivalent impact. And we then published this life cycle assessment on our webpage and our sustainability reports, and also the methodology on how we calculate it, because that's where it starts. Once we have a standardized methodology and a standardized view on the impact, then we can enable consumers to make very informed choices about what the product actually means. Then, personally, I think it takes too long time. I think the adaptation should be even quicker. We see on the demand side right now there is a lot of demand for our cars, especially in the UK here. It's one of the best-selling markets. There's a more supply issue right now when it comes to semiconductors. But the adaptation will continue quickly, but what we need for that is also a much faster development on the charging side.
But let me pitch you against Christina, given that she says we're congested, it took her 29 minutes to go nowhere. In London, we're used to that. But that you've got to think very differently, yet at the same time, you at Polestar are saying you want to develop a climate-neutral car by 2030. It's a process-era project, and it's your moonshot goal. What you're going to be producing is electric cars to sit in traffic jams, which will still be there in 2030. Or am I wrong?
Look, I mean, I personally, there is no one size fits it all, right? We still need to commute between cities. I used to live in the city many years ago. For the first 4 weeks of my stay here, our offices was in the middle of Soho. Then they were moved to Essex. So I had to take the car every day to get out there. There was no train connection, and I think we need to have different ways of transportation. What they need to have in common is that it gets down to zero emission. What we do then with Project Zero is what we say our moonshot goal, and it is a real zero emission car by 2030, no carbon offsetting, and it's basically three phases. We have a research phase, we have an applied science phase, and we have a phase where we do the car project. The car project phase is the easy part in a sense of what we know how to do it. It's still a complex project. But then the applied science part for a couple of years is how do we process, how do we industrialize. Where we're in right now is the R&D phase or the research phase. And there it is around, we know the input materials, we know the CO2 footprint of those, and the question is, can we do them climate neutral, or do we have to substitute them? The second thing we're looking at is function. So certain functions emit CO2, braking, for example. So the question is, can we brake a car without emitting CO2? Once we have gone through that, with our partners, because this is a collaborative approach, then we will move on into the next phase. And this is all about collaboration. Some of the companies in this room actually are working with us on that.
I'm going to go to Sam and Robert in a moment, but Christina, would you like to come back? And how does the Polestar vision of the car, which he's just described, how does that fit in with what you've just described in terms of a dramatic redesigning of cities?
I think we're talking along the same lines, right? What we're saying is that we don't envision a future where we don't have cars. We just need to replace the trips that we can replace with more efficient mode of transport. We're talking cities, but absolutely, when I'm to go out of the cities in my weekends and want to go out in nature, absolutely take a Polestar, get out. But I would also encourage you guys to have more of a sharing thinking to the Polestars of this world as well.
But a Polestar car is the same size as an internal combustion engine car. If it sits on a road, it still blocks it.
Absolutely. So the parking should necessarily then be outside of the city centre.
All right, so, Sam, I'm going to have to move on pretty quickly. Sam, let me come to you representing TfL, Transport for London. The focus of creating people-centric cities where people want to live. Now, we're living in a city, we're working in a city, those of us who are still coming to work, and more people are coming to work. They are using bikes more, they are walking much more. You're driving the taxi drivers mad because you're actually taking up in the roads a lot of space because of the cycleways. Now, help us understand the principles that you and the mayor are adopting here.
Yeah. Well, I think Christina and I are going to be great friends because I agree with what she was saying. Transport starts with land use. I know it's boring, but people don't tend to travel around for the sake of it. So you have to get that right. And it's interesting, I think we've gone through a kind of evolution which has accelerated. Back in the 70s, 60s, it was predict and provide. And we needed more transport, so let's provide some. Then, until recently, it was very much transport's role in driving growth. Deliver the transport first, then you can have the growth and the development, which is still there, there's still a need for that. What's happened now, I think, as a result of the very obvious to many people climate and ecological crisis and coming out of the pandemic, is the need for much more rapid and urgent change. And I think that does start with place. I think one of the challenges we have with how we're trying to deal with these problems is we're focused too much in sectors. That was talked about before. But actually where the delivery happens, where you deliver your place, where you build your communities that are based around walking, cycling, public transport. That happens in place. It happens through local authorities. It happens through community wealth building. And what we need to remember is we need to sell the positive vision about what people get back. I think the climate crisis is often presented as you need to have something taken away in order to deal with this problem. There's a moral imperative. Actually, I think we all agree there's stuff about modern society in our lives that isn't good and we don't enjoy, and we could have a much healthier life if we take that people-centric approach and we think about a city that is got less road vehicles, it's quieter, there's less road traffic casualties, even electric vehicles, they're still kicking up dust, they're still knocking people over. You've got more space to green your city, to turn the streets over to green infrastructure so it's more resilient to climate change, it's cooler, more community activity so you can actually live your life without having to spend lots of money because there's art, there's culture, there's economic activity in the local area which doesn't involve pumping in and out the city to spend a lot of money to satisfy urges.
Now, Sam, can I just get a data point from you? We have, in London, we have a congestion charge. We have an ultra-low emission zone, which has now been extended to within the North and South Circular Road. You're now thinking of broadening that to the whole of the M25. Now, I'm getting techie here, but particularly for our Swedish visitors, because to understand the impact, and I'd like to know what the impact from your data is on travel at the moment, because certainly there are a lot of tradesmen and delivery vehicles, and that's what's coming on where I'm going to go with Robert, who are saying we can't afford to operate anymore, whatever it is, each day. In other words, it may be right for the atmospherics, but actually it's in danger of threatening the economic activity, whether it's electric vehicles, which people can't afford, particularly tradesmen as well. And I'm doing this in a very headline way. Help me understand how you're balancing the aspiration with the practicalities of keeping the city going.
Well, first of all, it is a balance. Since TfL was formed, we've had mode shift towards sustainable modes, and it has been our defining goal. So it's about 53% was walking, cycling, public transport when we were established, and it's now up to about 65%. We've seen a car-led recovery, and the point is, most people in London don't have access to a car. We're not saying no road vehicles. What's left needs to be electric. It needs to be safe. What we're saying is we need to maximise people that are using those sustainable modes because of all those benefits you get back. And you do that the same way we've all done it, incremental change. We're seeing a reallocation of road space over to walking, cycling, green infrastructure. We're seeing a restriction on parking policy. We're seeing a resetting of the cost of using cars. You think about all the externalities, the impacts. Everyone is suffering from poor air quality, including the people in those vehicles. They're not paying for the cost of the impact that they have. So this is a policy that is not designed to impact on people so they can't live their lives. It's designed to push people towards cleaner vehicles and more sustainable modes by using that kind of economic lever, but done in a way that's carefully balancing the unintended consequences. And we must remember, in order to land that policy, one, we did a lot of work explaining what the negative impacts of poor air pollution was on kids' lung development. They met 9,000 people were dying prematurely. We actually had huge support for that scheme because we laid the groundwork. It goes back to the climate change agenda. You've got to sell this positive vision so you can get the support for the bold change. But also we did a lot of work to look at the impacts in terms of inequalities, and we also supplemented it with a £65 million worth of scrappage scheme. I think that's quite a progressive approach that we took because you've got to push things along. Everyone can agree on the vision and the future. It's the transition where the debate lies.
Tell me if my perception is exaggerated, but I can see that plumbers, carpenters, others in the trades who have to pay extra to come into the city or who have to change their vehicle for something which is low emissions or even electric vehicles, they don't have the margins, the financial margins, to be able to do that. So many of them are simply saying, I don't want to work in London anymore, or I'm not coming into the centre. Tell me if my perception is wrong here.
Yeah, I think it is in terms of many. I think there are people at the margins always with policies like this, and it's hard. You can't have a means-tested policy where you're literally going around everyone, working out their circumstances. But the fact we had a van scrappage scheme, the fact that actually when ULEZ went live, it was around 85% compliance anyway. It's up in the 90s now. And the London-wide scheme as well is in the 80s. So it's about pitching the timing right. It's about having the data on what vehicles are actually driving around the roads and setting your policy just to push people along and accelerate the transition that we need to see, and supplementing it with walking, cycling and public transport so that they've got alternatives.
Now, Robert, thank you for your patience. You run Einride, Design Intelligent Technologies for Movement, but I've come to you particularly on the issue of supplying and providing what is needed in a city and the times when that can be done.
Yeah, I mean, cities will still need...
Microphone, please.
Microphone, please. Maybe it's gone. Here we go. So yes, thank you. I'm going to join the water. Okay, no problem. So for transport, freight into cities, this will still be needed in the future, right? And I don't think that we can, in any near future, hope that the climate crisis is going to be solved by us consuming less, right? So consumption will happen, and the challenge is how can we? And I think this is what ties us together here, all of us on the stage, is that we need to replace every single carbon-producing or carbon-consuming vehicle and engine in the future. Still not working? Okay. So we will have to need to replace all the carbon-consuming and producing vehicles and engines in the future that run out of service with electric, if we want to have a chance of actually meeting the targets. The part that we're doing to that is that we're providing digital, electric, and autonomous transport. Why is that? Because 7 to 8% of our carbon emissions globally come from freight transport, and that's quite a good start. Also, trucks produce NOx, which is directly poisonous. Truck driving is also a very dangerous activity. And last but not least, I think we need to look into making it electric and autonomous very, very quickly, and we can do so today. We have the technology now to make that transformation.
There's a great phrase which I've not heard before, whisper logistics. Help us understand what that means when it comes to the supplies to a city.
Yeah, let me give you an example. One of the companies that we're working with, we're importing goods for them from Germany via electric truck, then via rail, and then via electric truck into the distribution centers in Sweden, and then we deliver these goods 24 hours 7 into the cities. That is one of the other big advantages of having electric vehicles. They don't produce any noise. So you can actually overcome the restrictions that you usually the restrictions that you have in terms of delivering into cities at night, and deliver the goods when there's not a lot of traffic in the city, and when you're not congesting everything, and when you're not standing in second line and making everybody hate you because you're unloading your truck. So that is another big advantage of electric transport.
And what's the take-up like when you've now been experimenting with this? I mean, that means people have to work at night.
We've been operating like this for 18 months now. We're speaking with cities to get the permits to do that. Sometimes that takes a little longer than actually putting it into action. But it's improving. Cities are understanding that they need to do something about this. And sometimes that is helping us a lot more than putting up some elusive targets. For example, the Dutch cities are not going to allow any carbon emissions in their cities by 2025. Right? So that is something that puts everybody in panic. And this is, 3 years away. So everybody needs to start thinking about their freight transport into cities.
Christina, what's your response to that, Voi?
No, I think it makes sense, but I think we're back to, we need to rethink how we've done. I mean, freights of goods and 100% will still happen, but we need to have a data-driven approach to it as well. If we have gotten to the place where you don't have the congestion in the cities, there is space, we have the data, and all of us sits with millions and millions of data points every single day. You know when there's not a queue, you know when you're not congesting, that's when these operations should happen. So I think, yes, I think you're totally right, but I think we need to have a data-driven approach to it, and I think we need to rethink how we do, generally speaking, transport in cities.
Can I just follow up on that? I think that's a brilliant point, because the logistics industry today is 70% still working with pen and paper and faxes, right? Digitizing it is the first step.
Sam, do you want to come in about the principles?
Well,
I mean, given the mayor has been re-elected, you've therefore got a significant period of time where there can be a significant transformation if it can be done in that time.
I mean, the freight sector is one of the most supportive of innovative next generation road user charging because they see the efficiency argument. Most, you talk about vans, particularly making deliveries, most of them are driving around with hardly anything in them because they can only do a few drops anyway. So it's about making efficient use of the road space that you've got. And that's why, the policy suite that we've got and helping to push people along will start to drive that efficiency. The congestion in London costs us £5 billion a year in terms of economic loss. So it is, along with the air quality and the climate change, they are the triple threat faced by London. So I think you'll find actually there's a lot more support for bold intervention than we give ourselves credit for because the support doesn't make the headlines. What makes the headlines is angry people in the margins, sometimes with quite legitimate reasons to be upset. And it's about finding that balance and supporting the people through that transition and particularly focusing on those that are unfairly impacted. And that's the approach we take to all of our policies. But you'll always find someone in the margins.
And it also...
Can I just check, does anyone want to come in? I've got a couple of other questions up there, but I can't see anyone. Nope. Christina, do you want to come back?
Maybe just to add on that,
Nils.
I think it actually it pushes the transition as well. It helps the transition. The strategy paper you put out from Transport of London, I mean that helps the adaptation of new technologies, EVs, etc. And I think that's definitely very helpful for us.
I can also give a concrete example of, you asked whether or not we believe that policies will also make it harder to operate in cities. For example, transport around both people but also freight. But it also forces us to speed up our innovation. Exactly. Take some of the examples coming out of Sweden and Norway at the moment, where you have caps on how much pollution, how much emission you're able to pollute at a certain given time of day, which means that we need to rethink collaborations, we need to rethink our operating model. One concrete example is when we're out swapping batteries of our electric fleet in the cities. We're doing this now in pilots and collaboration with the Postal Service, who has capacity in some of their cargo bikes, because they're using cargo bikes and not e-vans, because there's very few parking spots available. And there you see new types of partnerships and new type of operating model popping up, because we need to.
All of you, what is the kind of timescale we're talking about for this kind of transition? Given the urgency, the particular urgency which identified right at the beginning of today, and the kind of sinister, dire science that we're now seeing in big cities, Sam?
Well, what transition are we talking about? If we're talking about decarbonisation, that's one set of timescales, but we've got loads of challenges.
And what do you think the timescale is for decarbonisation? Okay,
decarbonisation, the Mayor's aiming for 2030. That requires a reduction in road vehicles of 29% and electrification of whatever's left. So that is a huge transition we need. But it's not just road vehicles and transport sector. We've got to retrofit around 240,000 homes a year. That's a massive transition we need to go to. This all wraps up into place-based approach and how you unlock private investment in order to invest in these places. One of the challenges the public sector has is it's not good at developing a pipeline of projects and getting it to the point where you've got an investable project. The public sector, they've got loads of capital. The private sector, there's loads of capital out there, but you say, oh, we want to do this. They go, all right, go away, come back when you've got a business case. What we need is the resources, the skills and the capabilities in order to bring that stuff to market. And that's what I'm particularly worried about. I think there's a real lack of green skills and the skills we need in order to develop these plans for how we transition cities and our places.
Can it be done in 7 years?
Pardon?
Can it be done in 7 years?
Well, it does require offsetting. That's set out in the 1.5 degree plan that the Mayor's published. It's hugely challenging. I think for us as Transport for London and our operational emissions, most of it can be done. We can get the buses to zero emission by 2030 if we had the investment. We're the biggest user of electricity in London, 1.5 terawatt hours a year, and we're already transitioning that to zero emission through power purchasing agreements. But transport isn't just the vehicles, it's also all the buildings. We've got 6,500 buildings, 100,000 tonnes of carbon a year. That's a huge transition that I think is going to be particularly challenging.
Let me put this final thought to you. It's the second question up there. What's the main blocker in transforming transport? Consumers, industry, or government?
I think the consumers want these cars, or in our case, and that the mobility, the carbon neutral, or at least tailpipe zero emission vehicles. what we need when it really comes to mass adaptation of EVs, for example, is a faster development of the charging infrastructure. The home charging is fine. There we need a holistic approach, but we need more fast charging on highways. We need more what we call destination charging for people living in flats and then going to the offices and being able to charge there. And then in that ecosystem, of course, how is that energy clean or not? That's the next question. So I think the consumers want it. I think we just need to be faster.
Robert?
Yeah, I would also say industry. I mean, we're having a lot of these chicken and egg discussions, right? But at some point, we just have to make an omelet and get on with it, right? I mean, we're building our own charging infrastructure. We're getting our own trucks. We're getting the drivers in place. We're providing a service, and we make it happen, right? And that's happening today. And back to the question that you asked Sam, I think we're going to be deploying 500 trucks this year. There's 5 million circulating in Europe, so that seems very, very small. It also is strange that with that we will be the largest electric fleet operator in Europe, right? So there is a lot that we have to do. And the plans that we make with our customers are usually 3 to 5 year plans. So it is possible in 3 to 5 years.
Sam, your overall view, and I should
Well,
say, can I just say to all our Swedish visitors, they need to go on the Elizabeth line. It shows that you can move. It shows that you can move large distances in a very short length of time, in a matter of minutes, where it used to take half an hour or an hour.
Yes, of course. And also, there was some great environmental benefit from that, because all the waste built a new Sea Island, which became a new nature reserve. So it's about taking that kind of holistic approach. I think this point about electrification is really important. That's why we need to take a place-based approach, because it's not just the vehicles on the roads we need to electrify and the charge points, it's also the heating. That's one of our biggest challenges. So we're just going to constantly rip up the road to increase the distribution network capacity. This is why we need to work together to take look at the local area energy planning, so we can actually minimise the disruption and get some efficiencies about how we deliver this.
Great. And I haven't talked about drones at all. We're not going to see drones flying around the skies of London. I should say, Christina, there's a note here: with excellent public transport in London, you could have been quicker and greener not sitting in a taxi for 29 minutes.
I was waiting for that question. Thank you for asking.
Well, that's why I held it to the end.
I think it has top likes of the day, and I think it's a brilliant question. The reason, and this is exactly what we need to rethink and what we need to solve for, right? We need to take citizens and consumers first and look at their needs and adopt the services thereafter. So I don't believe that this is all about us putting necessarily the big subsidies or the big investments to kind of get that shift over to more sustainable mode of transport, but is making those alternatives more attractive. For me, in this situation, I was offered an alternative, which was going from somewhere I'm not to somewhere I'm absolutely not going. That is how historically That is historically how public transport has been, right? But what we're seeing now is with the new modes of transport also popping up, you have an alternative to go door to door. So I think it's more of a question of how do we kind of just rethink it all, rethink about public transport, shared mobility, and kind of integrate it all, both physical and digital. So grab that e-scooter or e-bike, take it to the bus stop, and then you take the bus for the longer distance. And we already know that 30% of all our trips are intermittent, which means that they're in connection with public transport. So there's absolutely a need for it. So in this question, absolutely convenience.
But apart from these...
I like what you said, because we have had a small project with Cake, which is a Swedish electrical bike startup. You can take a Cake bike, put it on the rack on the back of the Polestar 2, charge it while you're driving. Once you get to your destination and you want to take the electrical bike, you take it off. And that kind of combination of different forms of net zero mobility, we need to have more.
Okay, well, I'll have to finish it there. The scooter story is not over, though, is it? No. I mean, if you're a licensed scooter provider, you can get on the scooter, but it's illegal in London. You can't do it on the pavement, you can't do it on the road, and there's been a dramatic increase in head injuries. So it carries...
Not in the ones that are legal. The ones that we're running, we haven't. It's the illegal ones with the small wheels and the lack of training and the lack of speed control that's a problem.
I'm glad you're clarifying
I think retailers have responsibility for how they sell those vehicles and where they're allowed to be used.
Yeah, agreed. But it shows there's actually a will to try different kinds of transport efficiently.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a city which is changing significantly on this. Thank you all very much indeed. I'm sorry it's so brief, but thank you very much for
Thank you.
headlining your thinking. Thank you.
Thank you.